Hi, welcome to my channel. Today I have another Friday Reads video. I will, for full disclosure, I am running a week behind. The previous Friday Reads, I believe I did 13 books. Today I will talk about the 10 books that I read between the 1st of February to the 9th of February, until the 7th of February. And then from then till now, I read another 10 books. So, another 9 books. But this Friday Reads, this video here, will be for the 10 books that I read between the 1st and the 7th. Now, as mentioned 3 times already, I've read 10 books, which is a total of 3,707 pages. And that averages to about 370 pages a day, less than a book and a half a day. Now, I started, admittedly, I started keeping track of my pages read because I saw that other people were doing that, and also because Goodreads does that. But it's really valuable for me to do that, and I'm kind of moving around because I'm going back some pages in my traveler's notebook. Now, some weeks I've read almost 600 pages a day. Another week I read over 600 pages a day, whereas this time around I have read, as mentioned, simply 370 pages a day. And that goes to show that sometimes I am in ill health and I can take a day and a half to read a whole book, whereas there's days that I feel pretty good and I can read up to 3 books in one day. So that's why there's 10 books for this Friday Reads. Alright, let's go jump right into it. The first book I read was The Winter Sister by Megan Collins. This came out the first week of February, February 5th, and I gave it 4 stars. Now, this is about a girl named Persephone O'Leary. She was 17 at the time, and she just never came home. Now, the story is told from the viewpoint of her sister Sylvie, and it doesn't talk too much at first about what happens when Persephone left home or disappeared, but it talks more in the present, and then it does shift back and forth to the past. Yes, my notes flashed up as I'm using my notes. Now, years and years have passed, and now Sylvia, as an adult, she has been estranged from her mother for several years. Well, now her mother's ill with cancer, and her mother's sister is going to attend to her daughter that's about to have a baby. So Sylvie goes to help care for her mother, who is currently in cancer treatment and needs someone to take her back and forth to chemotherapy. Well, when she is at one of the sessions with her mother, she spots a man who she always felt was responsible for her sister's disappearance and death, because it was 3 days later, when Persephone disappeared, that she was found dead. Well, this man, his name is Ben. He was never found guilty of the crime, and obviously he's moved on because now he's working over there at the hospital where her mother's receiving cancer treatment. So, as mentioned, she's estranged from her mother, but she wants to get answers as to whatever happened to her sister. Now, there's a lot of connections made in this book. Sylvie and Annie, the mother, they reconnect. Sylvie and Ben, they connect for odd reasons. All the while, there's a lot of twists and turns in the story, and there's a lot of suspects in the story. Not only does the reader wonder if Ben could be the one responsible for the disappearance and the death of that teenager, but could it have been somebody else? So I will say that some of the reveals did shock me. It kept me intrigued. I was there for it every minute that I could put into it. I was definitely there. I will say that this was a debut novel. It was an excellent read, and I want to thank Atria Books and Edelweiss for the arc that I had in order to read the book. Moving on to Falling for the Cowboy Dad by Patricia Johns. Now, this came out March 1st, and I gave it 5 stars. It's part of the Home to Eagles Rest series. Now, this is a second chance romance because Grace Beverly has been in love with her best friend Billy Austin for years. Now, they come back together for a very difficult reason, but a simple reason, because on the one hand, he's back in Eagles Rest, Colorado, because he's a single dad. So that's the basic reason that he's back there. Well, she's also there temporarily as a teacher, and now she's helping him with his young 4-year-old daughter. These two had been best friends for years, but they never had a romantic relationship. They had other relationships, as mentioned. Now he's a single dad. But they like each other, they're drawn to each other, but his focus, Billy's focus, is that of his daughter. And another thing about the story, not only is their relationship developed, but Billy has a particular problem that makes him, in many ways, the complete opposite of Grace. I don't want to mention what that problem was because I don't want it to be a spoiler, but I will say that I don't know that I've ever seen it addressed in a novel, especially if I've seen it addressed, it certainly hasn't been in a romance novel. So that was a sensitive issue that I really read about, that I really enjoyed reading. It was a great story. It was smoothly written, very enjoyable. All the characters were terrific. Not only were Grace and Billy fantastic, but his little daughter, Poppy, was fantastic. And also, Grace's mother, Connie, she was a great boon to the story as well. So I want to follow the series. And I want to thank Harlequin and NetGalley for this arc. The next book I had is The Forgotten Secret by Kathleen McGurl. Now, this came out March 1st, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Now, this is a story about a woman whose name is Claire Farrell, and she has inherited a farmhouse in Conniemeath, Ireland. She's an Englander, but she's in Ireland temporarily because she inherited this house. The timing couldn't be better because her marriage was at cross purposes, and she really wanted to end her marriage but wasn't quite sure how. But now she has the opportunity not only to leave her husband, but to start over someplace else. That's the story for the now. This is a historical fiction, so it shifts back to July 1919 and tells us a story about a woman named Ellen O'Brien. She was an idealistic young woman who was in love, and she left home for a job that involved her eventually to work in the war efforts. Now, what Claire found when she inherited the townhouse was proof that something happened 100 years earlier, and it took her some time, and it took us, the reader, some time to see what the connection between the two primary characters were. Was it whether it was Claire's story or whether it was Ellen's story? And the stories were seamless. They went back and forth, but they were done very seamlessly. The past was more exciting than the present in this book, because in the past we were talking about war efforts and spies and danger and intrigue. And in the story in the present, in Claire's story, we're talking more about relationships and family, and it wasn't kind of on the same level, but it was still a good story. And I think I gave it, what did I give this thing? I gave it 4.5 stars, so it was still a good story, mainly because I enjoyed the past story better. This was another Harlequin book. This was HQ Digital and NetGalley that I got this book from, and I want to thank them. The next book I read was part of a series called The Montgomery Brothers, and it's The Montgomery Brothers number 5, and it's Suddenly Mine by Samantha Chase. This came out January 1st, and this was another 4-star book for me. Now, this is about a man named Christian Montgomery, and there was a mistake he made years ago, and he never can seem to set things right. Part of this mistake affected his relationship with his father, and meanwhile, the story shows how he was a very, very hard worker. He worked so hard that it affected his health. Then we meet Sophie Bennington, who has her own problems, and she's in this area, in this town, for just a short time. She escaped her life, not due to anything bad, so to speak, just a negative situation, and she wanted to break. And so she takes on a different job, and this job brings her in contact with Christian Montgomery. And so the two, of course, they hit it off, and we learn very quickly that her main focus is to try to get Christopher to slow down on his job. All the while, their relationship starts to bloom and starts to grow, and they bring things into each other's life. Now, if the tides could just change, and if she could just see a future with him, and if he could just see a life that doesn't include working all the time. So it was an engaging read. I felt connected to the characters, and I like the fact that Christian, who, yes, he was a big, strong hero, but he had a definite weakness when it came to his health, and that was a real joy. And I say that was a real joy because it's nice to read of a less than perfect hero. And then also Sophie, she was delight because she had a lot of delight and, she had a lot of knowledge, and it was this knowledge that really helped Christian to grow. This book I got from Source Books Casablanca and also NetGalley. Then I had a book called The Perfect Alibi, but it was the second in the Robin Lockwood series, so I read The Third Victim, which is the 5th book for this wrap-up first. And that was by Phillip Margolin. It came out 2018, and I gave it 4 stars. Now, in The Third Victim, it's a story, a terrible story of a woman who was found battered and bound. And her story when she is rescued is that she was kidnapped and tortured, but she managed to escape. Well, at the same time, or shortly thereafter, 2 other women were found, but unfortunately, it was their bodies that was found. Well, she describes a house, and through the, what's the word? I can't think of the right word, but due to certain evidence, they realized that it was the house of a man named Alex Mason. So it was evidence. That's the word that I was looking for. Due to the evidence that they found, it seemed that they had proof beyond reason that it was Alex Mason who was guilty of these horrible crimes. Well, he was arrested and tried. Alex Mason was a prominent attorney. Now, so a trial starts to take place and starts to build, and his attorney is a lawyer named Regina Barrister. Now, Regina Barrister is a legend, but something serious is going on with her health. So she has as her second chair a young lawyer named Robin Lockwood. And remember, these, are the Robin Lockwood series, or the Robin Lockwood stories. Now, Robin Lockwood was a former MMA fighter, and now she's a new young lawyer, and this is her first big case. It's an excellent book with excellent pacing. I gave it 4 stars. I found it very engaging. It was delivered in different perspectives, and it was an intriguing review. I did scale down my review from a 5 to a 4, as good as the story was, because I felt in some cases the drama and the trauma was just a bit too descriptive. Excuse me. Now, going on to book number 6, which is the book that I mentioned a second ago, which is The Perfect Alibi by Phillip Margolin. And this is a Robin Lockwood number 2. Excuse me, I have indigestion, forgive me. Now, this book was released on March 5th, and I gave it 5 stars. Now, this tells of a story where a prominent college student has accused an athlete of rape. Now, the athlete, he claims innocence, and not only that, but he threatens the lawyer and the woman when he's sent to prison. But shortly thereafter, like 3 months later, another woman is raped, but the DNA matches the man in prison. So he gets a new trial. And the same lawyer that we read about in the previous story, Robin Lockwood, is basically the attorney that is handling this case and yet another case. And now the case is more of she's representing a woman in a civil suit against the man that may have raped her. And now this victim is afraid that she's being stalked. And then all of a sudden the lawyer that's representing the man that was accused of rape, he disappears. And then his partner is murdered. So a whole lot of things happen, all because of the rape that had occurred at that time. Now, it's the second book in this Robin Lockwood series, and the cases are intriguing, and the story is very captivating. And I couldn't put the book down. I really liked the first book that I read, The Third Victim, but The Perfect Alibi, I enjoyed much, much more. I gave it 5 stars, and I look forward to seeing what else the series has to offer. Then we have I Invited Her In by Adele Parks. Now, in it, I invited her in. We get a letter, we get a woman named Melanie Field who gets a letter from her oldest friend, Abigail Curtis, I'm not sure. Now, Mel, when she gets this letter from her friend Abby, granted, they haven't seen each other in 17 years since they left college, but when her friend says, I'm breaking up from my husband, I need a place to stay for a few days, then she obviously extends her hospitality. I mean, it's her friend, and she feels that she can do no less. Well, things don't go as planned, because there's a girls' night, and at this girls' night, Abby says, oh, I'm seeing someone, but I can't tell you who he is because he's a younger man. Oh, not much younger. He's in his 20s, but I have to keep his name a secret for a while. Well, it starts off as one thing, or should I say the story started off as one thing, but in my written review I said it quickly morphs into something far more sinister. So Abby, what she did is she finagled herself into a situation that involved extreme amount of deceit, and this affects Mel to her very core. It shows in the story that Mel and Abby were never on the same wavelength back in college, and Mel is desperately trying to find a good connection with Abby, but unfortunately, that's not bound to happen. Mel's at a loss, her husband's at a loss, and nobody can seem to control things around them. Now, the story takes a rather unpleasant turn, and I still kept on pushing through the pages because I had to see how things turned out. Needless to say, I was a bit surprised. I did sort some things out ahead of time, but there were other things that I didn't. So, therefore, I really enjoyed the book. I made a very personal note. I said, and I'm going to read this from my review, yes, as a mother, I watched the byplay closely, as who wouldn't briefly wonder what they might do in a similar situation. But as a reader, I just had to see how the author would bring resolution about. And that's basically, I wanted to read that because I feel like I took some of this book a little bit personally, but I think that speaks well to the author when a person like a reader like myself the author can have a reader like myself personalize a book. So that was, I invited it in by Adele Parks, and I want to thank Mirror Books and Edelweiss for that book for review. Another book, I think I got this one from Edelweiss too, which was Cemetery Road by Greg Iles. Now this came out March 5th, and I gave this one 4.5 stars. And this here is telling about a man named Marshall McGurl who left his hometown when he was 18 years old, swearing never to return. But there was a trauma that happened, and in addition to that, his father was ill, the family's newspaper was fledgling, and although he was a successful journalist with a Nobel Prize even, he had to go home to help his family and to try to get that newspaper back on track. Now, there's one person that Marshall could not avoid when he returned home, and that was his high school sweetheart, Jet. And Jet is a powerful attorney by this point, but they had a relationship back in high school that they just couldn't help but rekindle, and it really flavored everything that happened, because the major thing that happened was Marshall, the traumatic event that was beyond the fact that his father was ill and the newspaper was fledgling, well, somebody that he highly respected, that he really looked up to, was murdered. And as a journalist, what else could he do but to really try to find out what happened to this friend? So with Jet being this attorney and Marshall being a journalist, the two, they work together and they try to figure out what happens. Meanwhile, Jet's husband was an army buddy or a military buddy of Marshall's, and Marshall knew how dangerous this man was. And even though Marshall was sleeping with his wife, Marshall and the man were still friends. So there was a danger on that level too, because if they got caught out, anything terrible could happen. It really was an impressive book. Long, yes, 590 pages, but it was definitely worth it. It was fast-paced throughout. It didn't drop off at any point. The story was I want to say chronic. I don't know why that word comes to me, but it was a great story because it was kind of like a chronicle of events. It was on a layer. On a level that included murder, corruption, threats, mystery, history, passion, and drama. It was a great book, and I'd say definitely go ahead and grab it. I want to thank William Morrow and Company and also Etta Weiss for that book, and I look forward to reading more from him. The next book I read was Flare Up by Shannon and Stacey. This came out January 29th of 2019, and I gave this one 3.5 stars. Now, this is the sixth book in the Boston Fire series, and this story is about Grant Cutter and a woman that he was dating for a year, and her name was Ren Everett, by the way, and she left him suddenly. They were hot and heavy. Grant was just ready to propose, and then Ren all but ghosted him. Now there's a fire. He's a firefighter, by the way. There's a fire, and one of the people that he saves is none other than Ren. Well, he's glad that she's safe. He's really happy about that, but he's still heartbroken about why she left him. Well, Ren says she has good reason, and she did have a good reason, and now that she's back, is that reason still valid? And what was that reason? And I don't want to really go into that because I don't know if that would be a spoiler. Now, of course, the romance is wrought with problems because it becomes a matter of trust. She ghosted him before, will she do it again? So, not only did they have to develop a relationship, but Ren had formed friends with other people in the firehouse and their significant others, and those relationships are growing now too. So you have the primary relationship between Ren and Grant growing, but also that between Ren and her new friends. So it was a bit of suspense in this book as well, not just the romance, but a bit of suspense. It was a good book. I gave it 3.5 stars. There was a couple of reasons, nothing bad, but I did give it 3.5 stars. Now, I want to thank Karina Press and NetGalley for that arc, and I'm moving on to my last book, actually. And that is The Last Time I Lied. I'm going to be showing, obviously, the digital book, but I also have this in hardcover. And I've had this book forever. I believe it came out in July of 2018, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Now, there was a game that was played in a camp years and years ago called Camp Nightingale. The game was 2 Truths and a Lie. This game was played at first by 4 campers who were Vivian, Natalie, Allison, and Emma. Well, Vivian, Natalie, and Allison, they all disappeared one night at camp. Emma, who was the youngest of the 4, she saw the 3 girls sneak out, but Vivian, the oldest and the leader of the pack, told her, shh, don't say anything. So she didn't. All she could do was watch. The girls disappeared. Well, now it's a decade later. The girls were never found. No suspects were ever caught. And Emma is now an artist. Well, the owners of the camp asked Emma to come and teach at the newly restored camp if she would teach art at the camp for one summer. Well, this gives Emma a great opportunity because now she can do something she's always wanted to do, which is look for herself as to what could have happened to those girls. All the while, she's ghosted by Vivian. Is it a ghost that she's seeing, or is it her memory, or is it hallucinations? That is a part of the story that gave me pause, but I'm telling you right now, I'm glad I stayed with it. It wasn't what I thought it was. It was not what I thought it was. Even, it wasn't what I initially thought it was. It wasn't what I thought it was a second time, and then what it actually was, I wasn't prepared for. That's all I'm going to say about that. So it's a book full of despair and suspense because, you know, you have 3 young teen girls that disappeared, and then you have one girl that you don't know what happened to, and then you have Emma who's dealing with the trauma of it all. And this was written by Riley Sager. He did a great job in keeping me guessing a lot. And then there was something that happened midway right through the book. It gave me pause again. It almost made me put the book down again. But nope, I stayed with it, and part of the reason I stayed with it is I ran into a couple people and I was actually able to talk to them about where I was at in the book and how the book was making me feel and whether or not I had the guts to go on. Well, of course I did, because what did I say? I gave it 4.5 stars. So I love a book that does that to you. It makes you think, it makes you listen, it makes you feel, it makes you wonder. And that's what this book did. Now, I don't want to add any spoilers, but Emma was what you would call an unreliable narrator. We get the whole story from her point of view. And that goes back to that thought about me thinking that it was one thing, wondering if it was something else, and it turned out being something else entirely. So it was a really good read. I'm glad I finally got around to it. I'm looking forward to his next book, which is called Lock Every Door. And I think I want to backtrack even and check out his other book, which is called Final Girls. Now, that book was from Dutton and Edelweiss, and I want to thank them for that arc for review. Believe it or not, that's it. My next Friday reads will have, I believe, 9 books on it. I think I am going to try to catch up so I don't have a gap week. So you may get another video along the same line before next Friday, but we will definitely see. Meanwhile, I still have to get around to doing my haul video because I have now 61, 62 books. So that's at least 2 videos that I have to do for that. And I'm sure there'll be other videos that I get around to doing. But anyway, thanks for your time. I appreciate it. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.